Hey, what's up, Culture Drop? Galen here. This video is about hiring for culture fit, which is, I want to reframe up that. I've got some thoughts around that conversation, saying that culture work is what I do with teams and organizations. Here's what I want to say about this topic. A lot of times companies talk about this idea of hiring for culture fit, and I think that is the completely sort of backwards way to look at it. Let me tell you why I think that. Because a lot of times for an organization, we'd be like, oh, we want to have someone that fits in with our values and these kinds of things. I've got two main thoughts about that. Number one, how can you tell? How can you tell in an interview process that we're hiring for somebody who's values align with ours? Guess what people are gonna say in interviews? That their values align with yours. There's no way to know that in the interview process. But more importantly, and this is the key to this whole conversation, is that hiring for culture fit doesn't make sense. What does make sense is that you as an organization have a very clearly defined, already established culture. You don't hire for somebody that already fits perfectly into that culture. When you're hiring someone, you explain and clearly articulate, this is our culture here. These are the ground rules of engagement. This is how we show up. And this is what you'll be measured on. So for example, to give you a concrete idea, and what I'm gonna do is this week in the blog, I'm gonna add my team's Shift Yes DNA code, which is our culture. It is our single page document that is basically the DNA code that says, this is what it means to be part of this team. This is how we show up. This is how we treat other people. This is how we approach our work. So I'm gonna make that available for you to download and take a look at. But in that context, what I'm talking about here is when I hire somebody for this company, for my company, when I'm in the interview process, I let them know this is our culture. I'm not hiring them because they already fit in. I'm saying to them in the interview process, this is what it takes to be 100% successful here. This is how we deal with conflict. This is our relationship with feedback. This is what accountability means to us. And so I'm not hiring somebody who's already a perfect fit for that. I don't care where they've come from, right? Or what other cultures have been, or what behaviors were allowed, because not every person you're gonna hire perfectly aligns with that. And the truth is that the same employee will show up very different ways in two very different cultures. But I don't hire for culture fit. I hire someone and say, this is clearly exactly what it takes to be 100% successful. And this DNA code that you can download and take a look at is your performance management review. Any feedback that I give to you as your leader is going to be based on, are you showing up in alignment with all of these behaviors in this clearly defined culture? Because if you are, you're crushing it here. I hope that makes sense and resonates with you in terms of what I'm saying, but this is really how companies should do it. I also know from doing this work with organizations and teams and helping teams develop cultures that most organizations do not have a very clearly defined culture in place that is behavior based, right? They say trust, integrity, respect, teamwork, fun, excellence, etc., which sounds cool, but doesn't impact people's behavior. If you have a sort of behavior based culture that is the ground rules of actual behavioral engagement, you can say, this is what it takes to be successful here. So I think the conversation about hiring for culture fit is sort of it doesn't make sense to me, because I'm if you know what your culture is, when you bring someone into the organization, you're saying, this is how you can be absolutely exceptional. This is what passes here. This is what exceptional looks like. And I'm teaching you that. I'm bringing you in saying this is how you'll need to show up here, which allows for diversity, right? People to come in with very different personality types, different communication styles, right? I'm not saying everyone has to be the same, but when it comes to how we deal with conflict, that's very clear here. The way that we deal with conflict is that, right, if you have a problem with somebody else, you go right to the source, you sort it out with that person, right? Seeking mutually beneficial resolutions and making sure that we are making sure that other people feel listened to. That's how we deal with conflict. It doesn't matter if you're an introvert, extrovert, none of those things matter, right? Your socioeconomic background doesn't matter. This is our culture. So I don't hire for culture fit. I have a culture that's clearly defined. And when I bring people in, I teach them how to be here in this team. Such an important conversation, but that's my thoughts about it. That's how I like to go about it and how to think about the framework of that conversation and what it means. Just a quick bonus moment of something else that I think is interesting with that conversation is companies hire for culture fit. And I know, because most organizations don't have a very clearly defined culture, I'll be oh really? What is your culture? And they can't really describe it. Or 2 or 3 or 5 or 20 different people in the organization would describe the culture in completely different ways, which I'm how can you hire for a culture fit if you don't know what your culture is? If you don't have one that is universally understood, that everybody takes ownership for, a clearly defined intentional culture, and most organizations don't have that in place. So I'm what are you hiring for when you talk about hiring for culture fit? Usually you're hiring for unconscious bias and a bunch of other problematic things. That's my thoughts. But yeah, just an extra thought. I was this is also part of the conversation that I think is important. Thanks for watching and tuning in. Subscribe to our channel. We put a lot of content on here. You can also subscribe to the Culture Drop mailing list and get these emails in your inbox every Tuesday morning. Follow our social media channels. Put a lot of free content out about just being more awesome and building great teams.